this idea of connection plus challenge. And that's another way of framing the with window of the
That's it.
social discipline window that many people here are familiar with.
Yeah.
You talk about how our approach to doing this work has to be multifaceted. You talk about the circle, the cipher, and effective communication. I know, also listening to you on YouTube, you talked about, if we think about cancer as this
Mm,
huge problem, chemotherapy is not just like we're giving you one drug. It's a cocktail of drugs, right?
that's right.
To attack a big problem. And we also bring in like radiation and surgery and whole person care and like family,
That's
social,
right.
emotional support in order to get someone whole. When we're talking about the problems of the school to prison pipeline and the mass incarceration of young Black and brown youth, we take a multifaceted approach. How does the intersection of connection and challenge, right,
Yeah.
intersect with like these practices of circle and effective communication and others?
Yeah, yeah, brother. You really hit it, man. You said a lot there. If I can unpack that a little bit. So let's go back to the social discipline window, which I argue is a preeminent structure and framework in restorative practices. In fact, in restorative justice, I go so far as to say that if you don't get that, you probably don't get the rest of it,
Mm-hmm.
right? That understanding that framework of the social discipline window, and as the framework of the social discipline window was developed several decades ago, it was that intersection of control and support,
Mm-hmm.
right? And that, I believe, the evolution of my thinking is that had its place, that gave us some
Mm-hmm.
language, right? And I think that the evolution of this work has outgrown that language. So, for instance, in healthy relationships, control has no place, right? In healthy
Right.
relationships, right? I don't want to control my wife. I don't want her to control me. But challenge absolutely
Mm-hmm.
exists in healthy relationships, right? I want to be able to challenge her. I want her to challenge me. And then by, extrapolation, of course, our community, right? And so we substitute challenge for control. And then support, while on face value sounds great, right? Who doesn't want support? Except support usually denotes one directional, right? That one can offer support. And this is important in this work because we see this. One offers support outside of a relationship. What that looks like is just charity,
Mm-hmm.
right? Or white paternalism, right? Where one gives someone $1 on the street and then walks away, right? Whereas connection denotes relationship. It's bi-directional, it's multi-directional. So for me, I like those words, connection plus challenge, right? And so for me, that defines that with box, right? High
Mm-hmm.
connection, high challenge. And so using that as sort of a starting point, what I first got introduced to this analogy around cancer when I was in my doctoral studies at the University of Delaware. And that's an interesting one because right now we see misogyny and right wing politics attacking Dr. Jill Biden, right, for her doctorate. And Dr. Jill Biden and I missed each other by a couple years. I came into the exact same program at the University of Delaware, so I'm happy about that now, right? So big up to UD. And so it was in that work that I was working with a professor named Dr. Frank Murray, and I was talking about the work of supporting Black and brown boys, and really thinking about trying to construct what is going to be my contribution to the field by way of my dissertation. And I didn't feel that it would make as much of an impact, a contribution, if I just talked about one intervention, right? That I really wanted to think about this work as a comprehensive approach. And so he said, well, Malik, it sounds like, think about cancer and how when we add in these cocktails of approaches, it increases the survival rate significantly,
Mm-hmm.
right? As opposed to just one. And that really resonated with me for a number of reasons. One, it just kind of gave me a container that I could explain this work. But then two, cancer hits really close to home. My biological father died of cancer. My mother died of cancer. Cancer has wreaked havoc in my life. And part of why they passed away is because they didn't have access to a cocktail approach, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so as I was beginning to really think about um, giving voice to some of this work that I had been doing, I really, that idea of a cocktail approach really resonated with me. And so to suture the two, the social discipline window with this cocktail approach, all of these approaches should be rooted inside of the with box, right? So all of the work that we're doing needs to have not the balance. I kind of straying away from this term balance of connection and challenge, right? I think balance speaks to like stasis, right?
Mhm.
Like we try to find balance and then stay there at all costs. I like the idea of dynamic tension, right? That
Mhm.
dynamic tension means like energy, right? So there's energy created. So as I lean more towards connection, because that's what I feel like the people need, the tension draws me back to make sure that I'm also challenging. As I'm leaning into the challenge and accountability, the tension pulls me back towards connection as well, right? So I stay in that with box. And so as we're thinking about our circles, right? How are they showing up in the with box? As we're thinking about our affective expression and language, right? How are they showing up in the with box? And I think that to me, that's been charting a path forward as I try to define and do this work for myself and those others that I'm responsible to, right? Yeah.
Yeah. It it's really clear that like the the need for this work grew out of your lived experiences. But what was the catalyst for you to decide that like this is what I want to dedicate my life to? Even like this, because this is before you knew the words like restorative justice,
Yeah.
restorative practices. Yeah, right.
Yeah, exactly, right. Um uh so it's interesting. I've been an activist since I was about 15, and then all throughout college, and then in my early 20s and going into my 30s. And so I had been in the space of education. So I was trained as a teacher, taught in Philadelphia and in Baltimore, and then running schools. And as I began to make a shift and really question some of my own practices and way, which had been rooted inside of the two box, right? That
Mm,
high challenge, low connection, right? And
mhm,
the interesting thing about this work is that, and this is where I think we have a responsibility. Those of us who are thinking about this maybe in a different way, right, restoratively, that we have to respect and honor and look for the humanity, even in people that we disagree with, right? Because I certainly would have been one of those, right? And so as I stood in a place of being in the two box, I was using language of love, even in showing high control, high
mhm,
challenge, and very low connection. And what that looked like was, listen, the young people that I'm serving, um, the I love them so much that I'm going to hold them accountable and responsible. You can give them hugs. I'm gonna give them a kick in the butt,
mhm.
right? You can give them a whole lot of understanding and accept their excuses. I'm not going to, because if they don't learn how to obey and be obedient to people in authority, they will go out into the world and they will get killed by those who are wearing uniform, right?
Yes.
That I will accept no excuse. I don't care if you were evicted this weekend, come into school on time in uniform, period. Get it done, right? Push through, push past. And so it sounds on face value, right, like a whole lot of love and language of love. And I think that that's where it was coming from. The problem is that the techniques that I was using, the interventions and the way that I was being, was exactly the thing that I was criticizing the world for doing to these young people. I was trying to bend them to my will so I could save their life from a system that was bending them to their will. I was trying to keep them out of prison by making my classrooms and my schools a prison,
Mm,
right? And so
right.
I was looking in the mirror and I was seeing a hypocrite. Ultimately, I was using the same laws of the plantation that I was trying
Yeah.
to fight against, right? And so I was seeing myself as I was coming to reflect. I was seeing that hypocrisy and it was not sustainable for me. And so I started reaching for and trying to find different ways. And what was happening was sometimes you you have action, which is good action, before you have language for it.
Mhm.
And so that's what was happening. We started turning the tide on the alternative schools that I was running. We're having really good outcomes and metrics for those metrics that other people care about and for the ones that we care about, like saving their lives, right? That sense of community and relationship building. The problem is that I didn't have language to articulate what we were doing, other than, folks would come from Wisconsin, and we had some visitors from Australia, like, oh my God, this is amazing. What are you doing? Right. And I can bullshit, man, and I can talk, right? And so I can give them some stuff, right? But at the end of the day, it was really boiled down to, well, we just love on them. We
Mhm.
just love on them, right? Well, that's cute, but how do you operationalize that, right? How do you make that real and manifest so you can replicate it elsewhere, right? So that indigenous community in Hungary, right, can take some of the core principles that you put in place to serve young people in Wilmington, Delaware, and actually serve their young people there. And so we just didn't have terms and language. So
Yeah.
I found myself on a whitewater rafting trip in Maine. I guess the some areas where my grandparents and their people lived for a while, and I was on a whitewater rafting trip, and I spent a couple hours on a boat with a guy named Steve Hornsby. We called him Judge because he was a juvenile court justice judge in Tennessee, and he started talking to me about restorative practices,
Mm-hmm.
and I came to the realization while we were trying to not get thrown off the boat, the little whitewater raft, that that's exactly what we had been doing, and that's the direction in which we wanted to go. So I rushed back and I got connected with the IIRP, the International Institute for Restorative Practices in Bethlehem, which is not far from where I am, and that's sort of started my journey in earnest in terms of language, right? But it
Mm-hmm.
continued the journey that I had been working on for myself and for others for a while.
Yeah, absolutely. Uh, like there were like three threads that I want to go off
Yeah,
in there, like
yeah.
really quickly, for people who regularly listen to the podcast. The theme of people of color, right, replicating systems of harm that we learned
Mm,
from slave masters and people who were trying to control us. Into like our own children's lives is
yes.
such a rampant problem, right? I think it first got brought up on this podcast by this brother Ruben Roberts. He's out of Oakland right now, grew up in New York, Jamaican immigrants to the
Yeah.
UK, right? So his people, right? His parents, we're treating you like this because this is how the world is going to treat you,
Hmm.
right? And we want to prepare you for that. And there is love there, right? But why are we showing love in a way that's like pretty confusing? Like you're harming me to show love. Like
Right.
that's a tough thing to reconcile. And I'm not gonna spoil everything you write in the book, but like you talk about how teaching black and brown boys like this system of like control and like expecting um love by controlling people like is harmful to relationships that they
That's
have
right.
like passing down from generations between them and their future partners, them and their future children. It goes on and on. The other thing that I really wanted to pull out is like this idea of we had these practices, and even
Mm,
though we don't have like the fancy names of like the social discipline window or restorative practices, like it's things that like if we think about what does it mean to love somebody, if it means to like connect and challenge them, like that's it. Like we don't necessarily need like fancy IRRP, International Institute of Restorative Practices, or like these formal definitions in order to do this. And that's definitely helpful in order
yeah.
to like communicate the ideas and share them. But like this is work that a lot of our people know intuitively if we just take a step back from what our white supremacist
Yeah.
patriarchal colonial domineering society has taught us.